Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us to attend this webinar where we discuss the latest CVSS 10 vulnerability impacting SAP landscapes. As you'll have seen on Patch Tuesday when we're recording this, SAP have released a security note about this vulnerability impacting the ICM, or Internet Communication Manager, for those of you who don't speak TLAs. And specifically around the web dispatcher handling of, I believe it's HTTP packets, but we'll come into that in a moment with our specialists that are on the call. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Jonathan Cooper and Jan Hubika from Anapsys, who are going to walk us through the details of the vulnerability within the SAP estate. And we'll talk a little bit around how that impacts your organization and what you should be doing to respond to this vulnerability. So, excuse me, without further ado, Jan, I'd like to hand over to you as you walk us through the vulnerability that's been discovered and how it might be exploited by an attacker, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. So let me share my screen. Nice to meet you. My name is Jan Hubika. I'm a director of sales engineering here at Anapsys. And let me very quickly guide you through the latest finding from our research lab. So, as you said, the critical issue has been discovered on the component called Internet Communication Manager, which is widely responsible for HTTPS broadcasting data exchange, which means that affecting all the SAPs, ABAP, as well as the SAP Java. Couple of histories, facts. So on November 12th last year, we have been reporting our recent finding to the SAP. SAP respond with a note which is being published 8th of February today. There is also the note which you can search for. CVSS is 10. It means it's highly critical. It means that external attacker can, but just having the access to IP, use or misuse this vulnerability and basically steal the data. Confidentiality might get be exposed, as well as the system can be technically put down. So the attacker can gain a full ownership of the SAP. And the issue is resist in the SAP kernel, starting from 7.22 up to the latest one, which means that the issue is present most likely on 99% of the SLPs runnings around the world. We in Anapsys, we found it. We also tracking if there are exploits on the wild. We did not find them as of now, but obviously it might change very soon because full technical information has been released earlier today. Means the race is starting. There are guys which trying to find out how to exploit, so we can expect some nasty scripts in the wild very soon. How we support the issue, right? So running on Anapsys platform, we already update all our customers so they can scan if and what are the SAPs affected by this issue. And at the same time, we release the fingerprints in order to detect if someone exploiting. All our customers has been updated so they can check if the exploit took place. Now, because the node, as I said, it's brand new. So you can also see the attack vector. It's basically smuggling the HTTP request from ICM buffer. So it means that the user will log in, but then someone can take over the entire session, including the logon cookie, which means that's the attack vector. At the same time, it means that proxies or web dispatcher cannot help in this case due to the way how the attack is done. that's basically all what I do have. And now the time for the questions.
Thank you, and that's really helpful. And so by exploiting the way that SAP applications stack handles the HTTP packets, this is essentially allowing the attacker to hijack the session login
Exactly.
of an authenticated user, right?
Exactly. So my attacker can basically list the all running session on the ICM and then choose which of those gets stolen together with the logon cookie, which means my user basically stealing the session from the legitimate user, and attacker can act the way what the authorization has the original user of the SAP. So it's quite easy. I mean, it's quite easy. And with, let's say, some automated script, it might be the question for not really sophisticated attackers. It can also be used by someone just to play around. And that's the biggest risk of it, because that's what we saw in the past very often.
Yeah, and obviously, if they can then steal the credentials or the session of a system administrator, then there's real concern about what they might get up to whilst they're in the application itself.
Of course, that's kind of the worst case, but even the stealing the session from someone else, it's definitely breaking the confidentiality and all the security aspects, as well as the system compliance state, because attacker can act as someone else.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Anapsys customers will already have the capability to detect this vulnerability within their assess module, and
within the defend, sorry, it's there. My assets has been updated when the node is out, which is earlier today.
yeah. So as long as they're set to auto patch their OSP, then they'll pick it up, and they'll also be able to detect within the defend module if it's being exploited. What about customers who are not lucky enough to have OSP in place at the moment? Is there anything that they can do to detect misuse of this?
Well, to detect misuse, I'm not sure, because there is not single things what they can search in the log. It's actually the combination of a lot of those. And to be sure that the exploit taking place, you have to very quickly correlate a lot of logs entries at the same time to be sure that this is what you are searching for. So I don't know different way how to get this information than from Onapsys Defend.
Yeah, so not necessarily an easy one for people to detect within the application stack itself, because it's appearing as if it's a legitimate logon session from an authenticated user.
It's hard to find out that this one gets stolen, right? It's not that easy.
Yeah, and you mentioned 99% of SAP systems out there. That's based on the kernel
Yes.
levels that are out there. I noticed in the SAP note which is released, they talk about some specific scenarios involving the web dispatcher and saying if you're doing a direct HTTP call to the application server, you may not be exposed, but you should still patch. And I suppose that brings us on to the response to this, which is the closing of this vulnerability is detailed obviously in the SAP note, which says you need to patch your kernel and your web dispatcher up to a later version, as long as you're not already on those later versions. And we know that requires some downtime from the business.
Exactly. So the only way how to be sure that you remediate is basically to patch the kernel, and yes, it will require the downtime.
Yeah. And just to speak a little bit about how they can, make sure that they've got some of the visibility on this one. I think customers need to engage with their CISO and their information security organization so that they can potentially see suspicious logon events from IPs that they don't usually recognize, or geographies that they don't usually recognize?
Logon still goes through the guy who might start the session. So that's a tricky part, because then this session will get stolen. So you won't be able to find it in the logon. The logon has to go the way, which is okay, but then someone can steal it. That's the risk of it.
Yes, so that's really helpful. Thank you. And so something that I think our customers need to worry about is when what appears to be a legitimate session can still be misused. The exfiltration of that data is still a risk to the organization. Not to mention the ability then to execute other things within the application that could allow traversal and exploit of other vulnerabilities. We saw similar with the Log4j just before Christmas, which was the last CVSS 10 that we saw. So yeah, something that our customers definitely need to take seriously. So with that in mind, I'll just reshare my screen, and we'll talk a little bit about what it means for the business. So obviously, being able to trust that your users are who they say they are, or who you think they are, is the core principle of identity and access management. Making sure the right users have access to the right thing at the right time, and that none of the wrong people do. Eroding that trust strikes at the core of the business operations and the compliance of the organization. And I think if the auditors get hold of information that this vulnerability is being exploited, and on that point, actually, John, I know we've seen that there could be a latency of as little as 3 days between a SAP note being published and exploits being discovered on the web for these.
That's correct. Yeah. And which is from last year's SAP and Synapsys Joint Threat Intelligence report. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So the 72 hours is not a long window for any organization to react, especially when we're talking about systems that require downtime for patching, and that may impact business operations. I think the fact that you can compromise credentials of legitimate users, which calls into question the legitimacy of the transactions those users are processing, undermines quite a lot of that confidence in the confidentiality and integrity of the system. I think we talked about the exfiltration of data. I think fraudulent activities is one, but the system stability piece is another key one. If somebody steals my credentials as a security administrator, they can create themselves a user ID, they can create backdoors into the application layer, and then start to exploit that. So when combined with other mechanisms of attack that they use, I think it's really quite troubling. But I think we should recognize that the fix for this requires downtime, and it requires patching. And I mean, I don't know what your experience is, but most SAP customers I've come across struggle to get a patch deployed within that 72-hour window that we're talking about. Regression testing alone can take, for certain patch levels, months in some organizations. So I know it mentioned some hot fixes in there, but I think that still includes a web dispatcher patch. Am I right on that?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. Which again is a restart, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So being able to schedule that at a slack period of business operations is one of the first things that the business should be looking at. When is our next available critical patching window to be able to deploy even the workaround, not the full fix, but just the workaround to patch the web dispatcher. In terms of that exposure, John, the ICM is a key component, obviously, of the modern SAP estate. It's been around for quite a few years. You're very familiar with scanning for ICM vulnerabilities within customer estates. How prevalent is it that they're using these web dispatcher scenarios that can be impacted?
Well, that you just hit at the start of that, Tom, was a good point. The fact that it takes so long for organizations to actually organize these patches or windows. These are large organizations we talk to. They are planned months and months in advance, these system downtime. So that's the key problem we see. What we can say here is with Defend, we've got now the pattern in place to try and protect. So if we actually see this, we detect this issue in play, then we can go from detect into respond mode. So we've got information about users, IP addresses, and you can go into that next level of response. So I think get back to your point is what value can we add here? We're giving you that intelligence immediately within 60 seconds. We're scanning for this every minute based on the logs that we view to try and get you into that respond mode if it does happen, because it's so difficult to try and apply this kernel patch within the 72-hour window. And so until you can do that, we offer some level of protection.
Yeah, and I think that's key. That detect and respond piece, obviously core pillars of the NIST response to cyber vulnerabilities. I think the other thing I would be keen to see the business do is to bring the CISO into this discussion. I mean, quite often we do see a disconnect between SAP application ownership and information security organizations. But this is one area where we should say, what have you got at a network telemetry level or at a extended detect and respond capability that we can use to achieve that defense in depth? So here is the application information that's coming out of a product like Detect, and here is the network and endpoint information that can enrich that and allow us to shut down that attacker, but also to know who's attacking, right?
Yeah, it's a good point earlier, Tom, when you said, should the CISO know about this? Absolutely. It's a CVSS 10, it's the highest there is. And it's translating that technical information about ICMs, about web dispatchers, about the exploit, and how it bypasses all those other defense in-depth solutions and why it's important. So it's translating that very technical info to the CISO and the business as well.
Yeah, I think whilst not everybody who's involved in the decision making around response to this necessarily knows the difference between an HTTP packet or a firewall port, it doesn't really matter. You need to understand that what you've got here is a compromise of your system credentials. It's an attempt to misuse access to what is a business critical application. And from a CISO's point of view, SAP may only represent 10% of their total IT estate. But if it represents 60% of the business that's moved or 60% of the revenue that is being handled by that, then its criticality goes up even further in terms of needing a response to such a critical vulnerability, right?
Correct, yeah. Yes, the impact that it can have. Yeah, absolutely. Mission critical system, yeah.
Yeah. And then the final point that I think the business need to join the CISO on this journey is understanding that vulnerability management programs aren't just about patch management. It is a very, very important part, as we're talking about with the response to this vulnerability. The solution is a patch, but vulnerability management is about understanding what your estate looks like, where you may be vulnerable, testing those vulnerabilities, making sure that you can respond to them, making sure that you can detect when a vulnerability is being exploited, and pulling all of that together into one vulnerability management program. And that's why OSP is structured the way that it is. You've got assess to allow you to understand where your vulnerabilities might be, and then you've got protect and defend that allow you to actually do something about those vulnerabilities. And I think that's a key piece to get across to SAP application owners and CISOs when talking about SAP. That end-to-end journey needs to be complete to defend the organization correctly.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's ECC, it's S4, it's those cloud applications around it, it's this hybrid world we live in now as well. And it's the fact that, as today we've shown, this threat landscape is constantly evolving. So we have to evolve as well, which is why today there's been a patch release. There's actually 2 others included in that, where we need to constantly keep moving because the guys are getting more sophisticated and acting faster on this information. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was certainly one of the things that jumped out last year with the honeypot piece that you released, was the maturity and the capability of the attackers. They now understand SAP applications. They understand what they carry for a business and how to exploit. And that maturity has rocketed up in recent years. They understand the criticality of these systems. So it's not enough to think we're not going to be attacked in this space. I think you raise a very, very good point there as well around S4. That digital transformation journey for a lot of organizations is putting more and more content onto web front-end services, right? So things like Fiori, enterprise portals, and the journey to an increasingly online world means that this HTTP traffic that can be exploited is increasing. So it's far less likely that you will be protected against these things just by the statement of SAP is within our network, therefore we're safe.
Exactly, yeah. There's a lot of, yeah, you're right, because you not only have to consider your traditional ABAP code in the workbench. Thanks, Jan. You've also got to look at these new UIs you talk about, developed in the new IDEs and Eclipse and Business Application Studio, BTP. These are more customer facing, like B2C facing as well. So that attack surface then increases again further. It's not just the complexity of ECCS for all these products, it's the attack surface of that code base. And we see more and more people now developing in these new UIs in XSJS, Node.js, all these different applications of Java, which again, we can scan for and support. But yeah, it basically increases that, it adds to the increased risk.
Yeah. So if somebody's concerned about this vulnerability, what they can do is obviously talk to either one of our organizations, and we work very closely together. Obviously, check out the details in the SAP note released on today, which is Patch Tuesday, second Tuesday of every month. SAP release these patches. Ensure you understand whether or not you are exposed. If you're not exposed, still try and patch, because these patches do protect you against other exploits that might be detected. Ensure that you can apply the workaround and work with your whole organization to apply that remediation to this vulnerability. John, anything else that you'd add there?
No, perfect summary, Tom. Yeah.
Wonderful.
You nailed it.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon. It's a nice brief session, but just something to explain what I think is an important piece and get some important information out to the customer base for SAP as quickly as possible.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, guys.